Well, the news is out, and it's official. Pope Francis has passed away.
It's a truly significant moment.
Absolutely. And for, 1.37 billion Catholics, and really the world, the focus shifts now. It's onto the College of Cardinals, the election of a new leader.
Right. This isn't just an internal church matter, is it?
Not at all. The person they choose, their influence, it touches everything. Social justice, global poverty, international relations. It's huge.
Definitely. The direction the church takes really matters on a global scale.
So for this deep dive, we've pulled together quite a bit of material. We've got articles, detailed reports, focusing on two names that are popping up everywhere as potential frontrunners.
The ones everyone seems to be talking about.
Exactly. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle from the Philippines and Cardinal Peter Turkson from Ghana.
Two very prominent figures.
Our aim here is really to get a better handle on who these men are, what makes them tick, what are their core beliefs, and, what might their election actually mean for the church's future.
Sounds good. Where should we start? Tagle.
Let's do that. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle.
Okay. So Cardinal Luis Antonio Joaquim Tagle. People often call him Chito. He's 67 right now.
Born in Manila. And his family background sounds quite interesting. A mix.
Yeah, it really is. His father's side, they were from an upper-class Filipino family. But his maternal grandmother, she came from a pretty well-off Chinese immigrant family.
Huh. So blend of cultures right there. I read somewhere he didn't initially set out to be a priest. Something about wanting to be a doctor.
That's the story. He's actually joked about it, saying he was sort of tricked into even thinking about the seminary.
Funny. But once he was on that path, his education was pretty deep, wasn't it?
Oh, very extensive. He studied at Ateneo de Manila University, got his degrees there. Then he went on to get a doctorate in theology from the Catholic University of America.
And his doctoral work focused on Episcopal collegiality. Can you break that down a bit? And this connection to the Bologna School, what does that tell us?
Right, so Episcopal collegiality is basically about the shared responsibility of bishops, together with the Pope, in governing the church. It was a big theme from Vatican II.
Okay.
And the Bologna School. Think of it as a particular interpretation of Vatican II. The key thing to grasp is that they tend to see the council not just as like an update, but as a really significant shift, maybe even a kind of rupture from the past.
A rupture. Wow.
Yeah. And Tagle was deeply involved with the big History of Vatican II project for like 15 years. That really signals his alignment with that view. He sees Vatican II as this crucial moment the church needs to constantly return to and, live out more fully.
So that suggests he'd likely favor the general direction the church has taken since the council.
That would be the implication, yes.
And looking at his career, it's been quite varied. Seminary work back in the Philippines, international roles.
Exactly. He was a spiritual director, a rector at a seminary, a parish priest. He also held leadership posts in the Diocese of Imes before becoming Archbishop of Manila in 2011. Plus, he served on the International Theological Commission, participated in multiple synods in Rome, so he's been on the Vatican's radar for a while.
And then there was his time leading Caritas Internationalis.
Yeah.
That presidency ended. Maybe a bit suddenly. What should we make of that?
Yeah, that's an important point. He led Caritas, the big Catholic charity federation, from 2015 to 2022. But then Pope Francis initiated a review.
A review? Why?
It pointed to, let's say, deficiencies in management and procedures. Not necessarily financial wrongdoing, but issues with the working environment and governance. As a result, the entire leadership, Tagle included, was basically swept away and replaced.
So that raises questions.
It does. While some defend his record there, it certainly makes you pause and think about his administrative capabilities, which are obviously crucial for a pope managing a global institution. It's something to keep in mind.
Definitely noted. But he landed on his feet, didn't he? He's now the head, or pro-prefect, of the Dicastery for Evangelization. That's a major Vatican department.
It is a very significant role focused on the church's mission territories. And Pope Francis also elevated him to cardinal bishop in 2020.
Which is a big deal, right? Seen as a sign of favor.
A very big deal. It's the highest rank within the College of Cardinals, often seen as putting someone firmly in the papabile category, a potential candidate for pope.
And people call him the Asian Francis.
Right. That nickname really sticks. It highlights the perceived similarities in their outlook, their pastoral style. Plus, his background in Asia, where the church is growing rapidly, is seen as a major asset.
It's even reflected in the betting odds, apparently. He's the favorite, like 3-1.
So I've heard. He certainly seems to tick a lot of boxes for those looking for continuity with Francis's papacy, but with maybe a different geographical origin.
Okay, so that's the background. But what about his actual positions on some of the key issues facing the church, like ordaining female deacons?
That's where things get a bit more nuanced. On female deacons, he hasn't actually made a public statement saying yes or no. He was part of a Vatican committee that looked into it. They acknowledged that historically there was a ministry of deaconesses, but they concluded it wasn't the same thing as the male diaconate we have today.
So, kind of ambiguous there.
Pretty much.
What about blessing same-sex couples, especially after Fiducia Supplicans, that recent document?
Again, no direct public comment on Fiducia Supplicans itself, but he's generally viewed as being on the more progressive side regarding LGBTQ+ issues. He's spoken out against using harsh words, for example.
So, maybe supportive, but hasn't said so outright.
That seems to be the consensus view, yes. Possible support, but no definitive public stance on that specific declaration.
Okay, priestly celibacy. Is that something he'd consider making optional?
He's talked about needing open-minded discussions. He acknowledges the arguments. Does it contribute to misconduct? Is it an outdated rule? He calls for a serene but comprehensive consideration.
Which sounds like he's willing to at least talk about it, maybe explore changes.
It suggests an openness to discussion, definitely. Doesn't commit him to making it optional, but he's not shutting the door on the conversation.
Got it. And the old Latin Mass, the Vitus Ordo, where is he likely to stand on the restrictions?
He hasn't, specifically called for more restrictions himself, but he has talked about needing to move forward, not look back to some idealized past.
Okay.
So given his generally progressive outlook, his loyalty to Francis, and the fact he's actually a member of the Dicastery for Divine Worship, which handles liturgy, it seems pretty likely he supports the current restrictions.
Makes sense. Now, the Vatican's deal with China, that's been really controversial.
Yes, and on this, he's very clear. He strongly backs the Vatican-China agreement.
Really? Despite the criticism.
Absolutely. He defends it publicly, says it's necessary to protect the appointment of bishops, the sacraments for Catholics in China. He knows there are criticisms, but he argues you have to engage, even if it means, in his words, dirtying one's hands with reality.
They have a pragmatic stance there.
Seems so?
And he's a big supporter of this idea of a synodal church.
Oh, definitely. He talks about synodality, the whole church walking together, listening as rediscovering this vital gift of the Holy Spirit that came out of Vatican II. He's quite passionate about it.
Okay. And social justice issues.
Very vocal. He uses his platform consistently to talk about poverty, inequality, things like that.
But on some specific moral questions, the sources suggested his positions might seem inconsistent.
Yeah, that's something commentators have noted. He's clearly against abortion and euthanasia. But then on other issues like, say, giving communion to divorced and remarried couples, or on homosexuality, he seems to suggest that maybe universal moral rules don't apply rigidly in every single complex situation. Some also say he tends to downplay the seriousness of certain sins sometimes.
So strong on some core life issues, but maybe a more flexible pastoral approach on others.
That might be one way to put it, yeah, a pastoral emphasis.
Ecology, that seems to be a clear priority for him.
Absolutely. Very outspoken on environmental protection. He even took part in that Pachamama tree planting ceremony in the Vatican Gardens a few years back, which you might remember caused quite a stir.
I do remember that.
Yeah.
And in terms of how the church should be run, church governance, he's very much in the Pope Francis mold.
Exactly. Someone who knew him well, his doctoral director actually described him years ago as being like a Pope Francis before Pope Francis. So that style of leadership, that emphasis, seems deeply ingrained in him.
He's also pretty media savvy, right? Social media, TV.
Yes, he has a strong media presence. He's comfortable using different platforms, worked on TV and radio projects. He understands communication.
And what about these dancing liturgies? That sounds different.
Yes. He has participated in and apparently overseen liturgies that incorporate liturgical dance, including at his own installation as Archbishop of Manila. It reflects an effort, I think, to integrate local cultural expressions into Catholic worship.
Interesting. He also had to navigate the difficult situation in the Philippines with President Duterte and the drug war.
He did. He didn't shy away from it. He urged voters to look at the moral character of candidates, spoke out against the killings, and even had church bells rung to remember the victims. So he engaged politically, pastorally.
And his Chinese family background, plus his Vatican role now, that puts him in a key spot regarding China, doesn't it?
Absolutely. His personal history, his current job. It makes him a potentially pivotal figure for any future developments in the relationship between the Vatican and Beijing. He really emphasizes trying to understand China's perspective.
Now, we do need to touch on the concerns about how abuse cases have been handled, both maybe in the Philippines generally, and specifically during his time at Caritas. That's a serious point.
It is, and it's important to acknowledge some critics who focus on the clergy abuse crisis feel the church's response in places like the Philippines hasn't always been adequate. And then there was a specific case highlighted during his Caritas tenure involving a priest in the Democratic Republic of Congo who had been convicted of abuse in his home country but reportedly remained in ministry. How that was handled under Caritas' watch raised questions.
So that's definitely part of the picture people need to consider.
It is. It's part of his record.
Okay. Lastly, on Tagle, his theological influences. Seems like a wide range.
Quite broad, yeah. He's mentioned figures like the Vatican II theologians, Yves Conger and Karl Rahner, but also Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict. And interestingly, liberation theologians too, like Leonardo Boff and Gustavo Gutierrez.
That is a mix.
It is, but that Bologna school framework seems central. Seeing Vatican II as this call for the church to get out of itself, engage the world. He talks about a living tradition, something that evolves and applies in new ways. He even dislikes labels like liberal or conservative.
Okay. A lot to digest there with Cardinal Tagle. Shall we switch gears to Cardinal Peter Turkson?
Let's do it. Cardinal Peter Kodwo Apia Turkson. He's older than Tagle, 76 now.
And from Ghana. His family background also sounds quite diverse.
Very much so. His father was Catholic, but his mother was originally Methodist and converted. And he had a paternal uncle who was Muslim.
Wow. So similar to Tagle in having that diverse family experience.
Right. Probably gives him a very grounded perspective on interreligious life from an early age.
He entered the seminary quite young too, didn't he?
Yes, just 14. He studied theology in Ghana, then also in the United States, ordained back in Ghana in 1975. Later, he went to Rome to study scripture at the Pontifical Biblical Institute, the Biblicum.
The Biblicum, okay.
But interestingly, Pope John Paul II actually asked him to become a bishop in 1992, even before he'd finished his doctorate there.
Really?
Ugh.
So tapped for leadership early on.
Seems like it. He became Archbishop of Cape Coast in Ghana, served there for many years.
And led the Ghanaian Bishops' Conference too.
Yes, for a good stretch. From 1997 to 2005. John Paul II made him a cardinal in 2003. He also had a significant role outside the church, chairing Ghana's National Peace Council.
Playing a role in national life there.
Definitely. Helped ensure a peaceful election transition in 2008. Then, in 2009, Pope Benedict XVI brought him to Rome.
Right, to head the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace.
Exactly. And then, under Pope Francis, that council was merged with a few others, migrants, healthcare, into this big new department, the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, in 2017. And Turkson was named its first prefect.
A major consolidation, and he was put in charge.
Yes. He also led the Vatican's special task force responding to the socioeconomic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic.
But he's not in that dicastery role anymore, is he? He resigned in 2022.
That's correct. His 5-year term ended, and it came after an external review of the dicastery's work, similar in some ways to the Caritas situation.
Another review.
Yes. Following that, he stepped down as prefect. But Pope Francis then appointed him Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences.
They're still very influential positions, just not running a major department day to day.
Precisely. He remains a significant figure within the Vatican structure.
And like Tagle, some see him as someone who might continue Pope Francis's general direction. He certainly has that deep pastoral background, plus extensive international experience.
Yes, that's a common view. He spent years focusing on these big global issues. Human rights, the environment, fighting corruption. He brings a lot of experience to the table.
Okay, let's look at his positions on those same key issues we discussed for Tagle, starting with female deacons.
On this, Cardinal Turkson seems clearer than Tagle. He stated he's against ordaining women as deacons.
Okay, against it.
While he strongly emphasizes the vital role women play in the church, he's argued that keeping holy orders for men isn't discrimination.
Got it. What about blessing same-sex couples, fiducia supplicans?
This is another area where it's a bit ambiguous. Back in 2021, before fiducia, he did support a Vatican statement that rolled out blessings.
Right.
But he hasn't, as far as I know, made a specific public comment on fiducia supplicans itself, which allowed for non-liturgical blessings. So his current precise view isn't entirely clear.
Okay. Still a bit murky. What about promoting a synodal church? Does he talk about that much?
He hasn't specifically used the term synodality in the same way Tagle has, perhaps, but given his deep involvement in Vatican work under Francis and his general alignment on many social issues, it's probably fair to assume he's supportive of the underlying principles of listening and collaboration.
Makes sense. And the liturgy, how does he approach that?
He definitely embraces the reforms of Vatican II. He's noted, though, the differences in liturgical style and expression between, say, Africa and Europe. He sees liturgy as reflecting who we are as Christians and connecting strongly to our care for creation.
Connecting liturgy and ecology.
Yes. He also stresses the need for really solid teaching or catechesis about the sacrament.
His view on women in the church seems consistent with his stance on deacons then.
It does. He affirms the male-only priesthood, but is very supportive of appointing women to significant positions of responsibility within the church's structures.
And priestly celibacy. Does he see room for change there?
He suggested it's possible that making celibacy optional could help with priest shortages in some parts of the world.
Wow, okay.
But interestingly, he's also said he doesn't really see a shortage of vocations as a major problem in Africa itself. So maybe sees it as a potential solution elsewhere, but not necessarily urgent for his home continent.
Interesting perspective. What about divorced and remarried Catholics receiving communion?
On that specific issue, his public stance has been described as ambiguous, not clearly for or against relaxing the current discipline.
Given his family history, I guess interreligious dialogue is important to him.
Very much so. He strongly favors dialogue. But at the same time, he's also very clear in affirming what Catholics believe is the unique role of Jesus Christ for salvation and the fullness of truth found in the Catholic Church.
A balance there.
Seems like it.
He oversaw that big merger of Vatican departments into the Dicastery for Integral Human Development.
Yeah.
How did that go?
Well, it was a major restructuring. Like any big organizational change, there were probably some parts that went smoothly and others that had bumps along the road. The goal was greater coordination and efficiency on those key issues: justice, peace, migration, health, environment.
And his COVID-19 response work.
The focus there, under his leadership, was very much on the socioeconomic impacts and coordinating scientific advice through the pontifical academies. Practical help, research, policy recommendations. Some noted maybe a bit less emphasis on the purely sacramental side during that specific crisis response.
Now, he's been quite involved with the World Economic Forum in Davos. That's raised some eyebrows, hasn't it?
It has. He's been a regular participant, actively engaging with global business and political leaders. He promotes the church's social teaching, arguing for economic models that serve the common good and prioritize people, not just profit.
He talks about stakeholder capitalism.
Yes, he's endorsed that idea, which itself is debated whether it's a genuine shift or just rhetoric. He was also involved with the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, working alongside major corporations, providing moral guidance. That also drew both praise and criticism.
So, willing to engage directly with the centers of global finance and power.
Very much so. He sees it as a necessary place to bring the church's message.
Corruption is another theme for him.
Yes, he's devoted significant energy to fighting corruption, both within church structures and in society at large. He even co-wrote a book about it, and Pope Francis wrote the foreword.
His view on human rights seems rooted in theology.
Definitely. He grounds human rights in the concept of human dignity, the imago Dei, being made in the image of God. But he also makes a distinction. He talks about fundamental natural rights versus what he calls faux rights.
Faux rights? Like what?
He specifically mentions same-sex marriage as an example of what he considers a faux right. He's also very critical of the term reproductive rights when it's used to include abortion access, and he opposes Western countries trying to impose those norms on African nations.
So quite strong views there. And on other life issues, euthanasia, contraception.
He strongly condemns both abortion and euthanasia, seeing them as part of an anti-life mentality. He defends conscientious objection for healthcare workers. On contraception, his views seem a bit less clear-cut overall, though he has shown some flexibility regarding condom use, specifically for HIV prevention.
What about homosexuality? Have his views evolved there?
It seems they might have become more nuanced over time. Initially, his statements aligned clearly with the traditional teaching that homosexual acts are immoral, calling for chastity.
But
more recently, while still upholding traditional marriage, he very publicly opposed moves to further criminalize homosexuality in Ghana. That was quite controversial there, suggesting a shift towards opposing legal penalties even if the moral judgment remains.
interesting. Polygamy is a reality in parts of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
How does he approach that pastorally?
The indications are that he favors a degree of pastoral flexibility and discretion when dealing with families in those complex situations.
Immigration, another huge global issue.
He shows a nuanced understanding. He
Right.
talks about the different root causes of migration, poverty, conflict, climate change. He emphasizes balancing a nation's right to security with the moral obligation to welcome and care for migrants based on their inherent dignity.
And his perspective on Islam.
He clearly speaks out against Islamophobia, but he has also voiced concerns about threats to freedom posed by extremist interpretations. He mentioned a specific movement in Ghana he called Purifying Islam as a concern, but he remains committed to dialogue with Muslims of goodwill.
He also has ideas about politics and global finance.
Yes, he stresses educating people, especially leaders, to serve the common good, and he's actually advocated for some kind of international public authority to regulate the global financial system.
Wow, that's a big idea.
It is. Shows his focus on systemic issues.
And finally, Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si's. That seems really central for Turkson.
Absolutely central. You see it running through so much of his work. He constantly connects environmental protection with human dignity, arguing you can't separate the cry of the earth from the cry of the poor. Advocating for human rights-based environmental policies is key for him.
And his current role of the Pontifical Academies fits right into that.
Perfectly. He's constantly organizing conferences and initiatives there on climate change, social justice, health, sustainable development, all those interconnected global challenges.
So when you step back, you really see two distinct figures, but maybe with some overlapping concerns, particularly on social justice and the environment.
Exactly. Tagle, younger, the Asian Francis, maybe representing more direct continuity with the recent pontificate coming from that rapidly growing region. And Turkson, older, with deep Vatican experience, that strong focus on integral human development, ecology, anti-corruption, potentially representing a historic first for Africa.
It really highlights the stakes. The College of Cardinals has a profound choice ahead.
They certainly do. The direction they choose will resonate for years, decades maybe, shaping the church's voice and actions across the globe.
As people listen to this, it's worth thinking, what aspects of Tagle's or Turkson's background, their views, really stand out? What challenges seem most urgent for whoever comes next?
Absolutely. This deep dive gives a picture, but it's just a starting point, really. There's so much more you could explore reading their own writings, looking deeper into the conclave process itself. It's a fascinating and incredibly important moment.